Okay, if I remember correctly, we were writing our our dice roll object, dealy flippy. Okay. So we created our dice roll for. Let me just do something real quick to make my life easier. Right now, I'm passing in the number of sides and the quantity. I hate that. I hate the order I'm passing those in. So let's say you don't like the order you're passing crap in. So I'm going to go into my constructor, and instead of it taking num sides first, I'm going to have it take the quantity first. I'm going to have it take num sides second. Okay? Everything else is the same. So then out here, I'll pass it 20 for the quantity and the number of sides second. So now I can say 20d6. Get it? All right. So I'm spending too much mental time converting every single time I see that, and I can't do that at 10 in the morning. It's not good. This is only my 5th cup of coffee today too. And I've only spanned that across 2 separate mugs, if you call this a mug. And one of them I need to replace because one of them the paper's starting to break down. Which I find funny because, you know, if you go to the grocery store and you buy like the disposable coffee cups, you know, the Chinette ones, like 10 cups is like $6, like super expensive. Why? Why do they exist? I'd get 1,000 of these with lids. You know, it's the good kind of lid. It's, you know, kind of generic cheapy version of the good kind of lid, but it works fine. I get 1,000 of these off of Amazon for like $50 for 1,000. And you know what? It never starts melting into paper. Once my coffee starts tasting like paper pulp, then I know I need to dump the other ones. So I just keep reusing those cups until either A, I put some liquid in there that I don't finish drinking and it goes bad, or B, it starts breaking down chemically. But then I have this problem where I only have 2 cup holders on the front. So I have to rotate between those 2 cup holders and the passenger seat. And you only put things with no liquid in the passenger seat, otherwise bad things go down. All right, so we're going to create our dice roll object. It's going to be, this guy's for a 20d6. We're going to roll it 3 times. We'll see we get 3 different rolls. Then we directly change our quantity, which I'm going to say we should not be able to do. And then we roll it again. So there's our 3 rolls of 20d6 followed by a 500d6 roll. Okay? So we're saying that this line right here is undesirable. We should not be able to directly change. What's this guy called? What kind of animal is that? What's quantity as it relates there? We're seeing it in use, not a definition. We're seeing it being used. What kind of animal is that, and how do you know? Don't all speak at once. What are the options? What are things that go into a class? A class holds 3 things. Methods, constructors, fields. Okay? Which of those 3 is this guy? And how do you know? Again, this is identifying it in the wild. Identifying it when we see it, not when we're defining it. Go ahead.
Field because it doesn't have parameters.
Field, no parentheses. No parameter list. Okay, good. So, and what's a field? If you had to give me a concise definition of a field, what might you say? Trista?
Good morning, sunshine.
Like a variable type thing.
So far, so good.
All I got.
Okay, variable associated with an object. Global variable associated with an object. Okay, that's what a field is. So just kind of a, well, field's not really a fancy name, but a somewhat fancy name for a variable. Okay, but in this case, we are directly modifying a variable associated with a class. Now, I'm going to tell you that it is almost always bad programming practice if you see this happening. This is not the way this should occur. It's allowed, it's convenient, but it's almost always bad programming practice. You would only want to do this when you're writing your own little simple things and you're using it. Otherwise, there's probably a good reason not to, and we're going to talk about that today. Okay? So, everybody understand what we're accomplishing with this one line right here. We're modifying that internal variable quantity to be something other than what we originally set it to. Okay? So, we have 3 different security settings. Actually, I'm going to say we have 4 different security settings. The 4th one's kind of made up. 4th one would be package level security. In other languages, like in C++, this is called friend. From our perspective, this doesn't matter because this is like the default. If you don't put anything, this is what it is. Okay? So we'll talk about that, but this isn't a word you'll ever use directly. It just is what the default security level is. Okay, so notice over here, we haven't put anything out in front of these guys. And we're also about to give some definition about what public out in front of, like public static void main, what this guy means, that kind of crap. Okay? So, really we have 3 that we need to understand. Public means that a field, method, or constructor, so basically a class member, is accessible anywhere. Let's say I think we could just say anywhere for right now. That'll mean something in a minute, but basically no security. Open access. Anybody can access it. As long as they have access to the object, they have access to these things, these specific class members. Okay? Private means that a field, a method, or constructor is accessible only within this class. Protected, and this kind of relates to inheritance, which we talked a little bit about last time, not in detail, but just kind of introduced that it exists, is when a field, method, or constructor is accessible within this class or a parent's class. And even saying parent's class is a little bit misleading because it's really anywhere in the hierarchy above us. Actually, let me say this differently. Because that implies that this is a security setting for what's above us, which is kind of a lie. So erase what you just wrote. Field, method, or constructor is accessible within this class or children of this class. So things that inherit from this class. We can give access to our fields by making those fields or members, or those fields or methods or constructors, by making them protected. We not only have access to it internally inside of our class, we also are giving access to our children, things that inherit from us. Okay? So, rule of thumb. make a class member as secure as possible to begin with, and then loosen the security as necessary. So that would imply that we should make everything private to begin with. Now you'll find out pretty quick that constructors should very, very rarely, in fact, should never be, is that true? Very, 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 very rarely should be private. Occasionally should be protected, but are almost always, or at least usually, public for constructors. But all our other things, we have to ask that question. So make everything private to begin with. And then if you need it to be accessible in different places that private doesn't allow you to access it, then loosen it up. That make sense? So that means that if we come in here and we want to make our 3 fields private, we just throw the word private out in front. Copy this. Okay, so we throw private out in front. And private means we can access these anywhere inside of this class. So if we are inside of a file called dice roll, we have access to these three variables. No harm, no foul. So internally in here, we changed nothing. We still have full access to those guys. But we'll see if I come out to driver, it's no longer happy with this guy. If I highlight over it, it says the field dice roll.quantity is not visible. We don't have direct access to this. That make sense? Okay, so we just closed down the door. Now let's say then that we wanted to give access to our quantity variable. It's like, wait a minute, I thought you said you didn't want to give access to it. I said I don't want to give direct access to our quantity variable. But let's say I wanted to give people read-only access to the quantity variable. That is, to be able to ask an object like dr, what is your quantity? Because keep in mind, we might have created this in a whole different class somewhere. The person who's using this object might not recognize that the quantity is 20 and the size is 6. They might need to retrieve that information. So how can we write into our dice roll object the ability to ask the dice roll object, what is your quantity, when we set it as private? Well, the easy solution would be set it back to public or set it to nothing. That just gives you full access to it. But I want to give us read-only access to it, using only what we know right now. So what can I do inside dice roll to give read-only access to quantity, using only the tools that we're aware of? This would be one of those situations where you should be MacGyvering. What do you think? Go ahead.
Make a method that returns the quantity.
Make a method that returns the quantity. So we'll come in here. We'll create a method, and this method could either be public or it can be nothing, right? We've already proven what things are accessible out someplace else, so we can just make it, we'll make it public. I think that says explicitly that we want to give access to other folks. Okay, and this guy is going to return a what? Int, because quantity is an int. So he's going to return an int. We'll call this guy getQuantity. Take no parameters, and this guy's going to return this dot quantity. Now, somebody other than Amish. Did I have to say this dot quantity there, or could I have just said quantity? And I promise you my follow-up question will be why. Go ahead.
Because quantity is the global variable, and quantity, if you just said quantity, the method that it's in doesn't know about any quantity because there is no local.
Okay, so what's your answer? Your answer is you do need this.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start off by saying that's the wrong answer. You do not need the this keyword here. In this particular case, it's optional. Works just fine. I wanted to unhighlight that crap. There we go. So now that you see that you don't need the this keyword there, tell me why you don't need the this keyword there.
Because it is a global variable and there is no local.
Yeah. So you were talking about the right stuff. You just interpreted your understanding incorrectly. So the idea is if we say quantity here, this is just a variable. And whenever we have a variable always, 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 always resolves to its most local definition. So now we need to go through that variable resolution algorithm, I guess, where we have to check the most local scope, then the next local scope, then the next local scope. So what do? We look locally here. Is there a local variable inside of getQuantity called quantity? There's not. But we still have more places to look. So where do we look next? We look at our next most local scope. And our next most local scope is at the class level. Don't get confused and think that it's in this constructor level, because this constructor and this method are two separate entities. They never cross paths. Okay? So they both live within a global environment. They both live within the scope that is defined by our dice roll class. That make sense? All right, so we look locally and we don't find quantity. Then we go up to the next scope and we do, in fact, find quantity here. So we don't need the this keyword here. Now, I happen to prefer to use the this keyword here for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, I just demonstrated. When I say, since I know it's a field, when I say this dot, what did it do? It gave me a list of all the class members, all the methods, constructors, and fields. So I could just put in a Q for quantity, and I don't have to worry about misspelling it. Okay, benefit number one. Benefit number two, it gets you used to dealing with the this keyword and understanding what it means. Okay? So this would fall into that category similar to if statements, where technically an if statement does not require the opening and closing curly braces if you only have one statement following it. But it's never wrong to put the opening and closing curly braces with an if statement or a loop. So my argument would be always put them there. It makes your code look cleaner from a formatting perspective, and it's never, 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 never wrong. So wouldn't you prefer, with all the things that can go wrong with programming, to never, never, never be wrong when it comes to curly braces? That would be a nice thing, right? Eventually, once that statement sounds stupid to you, then you don't need me anymore. You won't need me holding your hand telling you all these ways to avoid extra errors. Then you'll know when to use the curly braces and when not to, and you might choose. But I can tell you this. I've been writing, let's see, how old are some of you? 20, 19, 21? Who's 21 in here? Or older? Who's 20 or older? Who's 19? 18? Okay, so I've been programming as long as some of you have been alive. I started programming when I was 9. Now, I still put curly braces. And I still often use the this keyword as well. So that gives you an idea. I think it makes your code cleaner. So it's not one of these things that you'll eventually grow out of and you'll start wearing big boy underwear. Okay. It's something that I think is a good programming practice forever. Okay, So we're going to have a method here called getQuantity. GetQuantity returns an int. It's public, so we're exposing this particular method to everybody. And what does this guy do? It returns the quantity field to this guy. This gives us read-only access to quantity. But it doesn't let us change the quantity. We can only ask it what the quantity is. So out here in driver, we can do a system.out.println. Okay, real quick. Class method or instance method, somebody who usually doesn't answer. This is the method we just wrote. So we're looking at the method definition. Is this a class method or an instance method? Go ahead. Instance method, how do you know? No static, perfect. So, how do I call instance methods? Did you cheat off Abe?
No. I swear to God.
Look, I'm not as stupid as you think. Man, you got so defensive. It was so funny. All right, so how do I call instance methods in general?
That means you cheated.
I actually saw a documentary about that once that talked about when people invoke God's name, people automatically assume they're not lying. You know, if you just say, did you do this? No. Then if you say, I swear to God I didn't do it, even if you're lying, people will take you more seriously. I think that's Christian worldview. That's a point. bank that. All right, so how do I call instance methods?
You have to refer back to the driver and you would say DR.
Say DR, okay. I didn't like the whole refer back to the driver thingy because I think that it will be confusing. We call instance methods using an instance of the class in which the method was defined. We call class methods using the name of the class in which the method was defined. So since you told me this guy is an instance method because its definition does not contain the word static, we would need an instance of the class in which this method was defined to call it. This class is called dice roll. So we're going to need an instance of dice roll to call this particular method. And we just happen to have an instance of dice roll right here. Right? What's DR? Trick question. Red, what's DR?
Bacon. You said it's a trick question.
No, it's a trick question with a legitimate answer.
With you, I never know.
Deals with variable resolution. What is DR? DR is a variable, correct? What kind of value does DR hold? Memory address. That memory address points into memory to what?
There's no such thing as pointers.
So if I drew the picture of this, here, let me. Dice roll, DR is equal to new dice roll. I have 20 D6. See how much easier it is right off the bat for us Dungeons and Dragons pros? You don't say D6 20. It just doesn't make any sense. God, that's just so stupid. All right, so let's just say we have our variable DR here. And DR has a value. Let's just say DR's value is 100. Now, somewhere up in memory, we have memory address 100. So maybe here, we'll put a couple of different memory addresses. By the way, I found this bug last night. Well, I say it's a bug. Forever, I've used Keynote, and when I just start putting things in order like this and just keep pasting, it puts them in the same line. But now with the new version of Keynote, it doesn't. I have to actually go and place each one. Just garbage. We're going to have a super awesome extra credit question here in a second. Here, we're going to make this 108 just because that'll be funny. All right, so that's what actually happens. We create our dice roll, we create our variable called dr. So here's dr. Dr holds a value. Its value it holds is a memory address. How do we know? The new keyword. New keywords, our real estate agent always boils down to a memory address. How do we use that memory address? That memory address is said to point into memory. So we point to memory address 108 where 20d6 actually lives. This is our instance of our dice roll. So it took a couple of steps to get there, but ultimately dr boils down to an instance of dice roll. But dr itself is a variable which holds a memory address. And when that memory address is resolved, we get a instance of dice roll. That make sense? Okay, so that's a pointer, even though pointers don't exist, as Trista pointed out. Ready for the bonus? Bonus question is like cash cab. You've arrived at your destination. You can take the $400 right now, or you can play double or nothing and go for the bonus question. How many of you would take $400 cash right now? I think most of you probably would have got kicked out of the cab way before this.
So,
Have you ever watched that show?
yeah.
Man, some of those people that get in there are such idiots. I mean, it's bad. And then you have sometimes those groups of like 4 people that you just think are astrophysicists somewhere. You know,
Everything.
like, yeah, they rack up like $2,800 and don't miss anything. And they're like, okay, we're at our destination, or we're halfway to our destination and we're out of questions. This has never happened before. Yeah. That's always funny. So why is it that I have memory addresses up here, starting with 100, then jumping to 104, then jumping to 108, then jumping to 112, jumping to 116? What does that indicate about the operating system? That, well, the memory management system associated with memory for this. And we did talk about this in here. So it's a bonus question. It's kind of an under the hood detail type thing.
Repeat the question.
I've just randomly started off at memory address 100 for the example. But after memory address 100, I jumped to memory address 104, then 108, then 112, then 116. What does that say about memory in this example? Assuming this represents real memory somewhere, what could you tell me about memory in this particular operating system if it was lined up like this? Go ahead.
That it's divided into bits.
All memory would be divided into bits. So tell me a little bit more. Specifically, how many bits?
Is it 32 bits, 4 bytes?
4 bytes is 32 bits. I agree with that. So what does that tell you about memory management here? What does that tell you about the size of a memory address? It's 32 bits. So the size of our memory address here is 32 bits big. That's why I'm jumping by 4 byte chunks. Okay? So this goes back to our discussion with pointers when we were kind of asking the question, well, technically a short, for example, is only 16 bits, right? A short integer, we never use it, but that's one of our primitive types is a short. That's actually a 16-bit signed integer. Well, which is more convenient? Which is more efficient to give somebody an actual short or give them the address where they can find the short? The short itself is actually more efficient. Okay? But which is worse from an efficiency perspective? giving somebody a 32-bit address for a 16-bit value, or giving somebody a 32-bit address for a 4 terabyte value. The other way, if we flip-flopped them around and we passed the value instead of the address, we'd be way worse if we gave somebody the house instead of the address of the house. Seems like kind of no big deal if we're giving them the address to a short as opposed to the short itself. We're only wasting 16 bits, right? Okay, so realistically, though, under the hood with Java, they pass primitive types by value, unless it makes sense to pass them by address. But any way you cut it, you're dealing with them as if they're passed by value. So it always does it in the most efficient way, but you still have access to it as if they were passing it by value. Okay, so in any case, this is how the model would work for instances of variables. So we have a variable called dr. Dr holds a memory address. That memory address points somewhere up into memory where the actual instance of dice roll lives. So back here, we call our get quantity method using an instance of the dice roll class, using an instance of the class in which the method was defined. The method was defined inside the dice roll class over here. It's an instance method because it doesn't have static, so we need to call it with an instance of the dice roll class, which dr ultimately boils down to. Okay, so we'll roll a couple times. So we'll get 3 20 d6s rolled. Then we'll print out the quantity. So what should print out here? 20. This should retrieve the value of quantity from dr. Read only. Then we'll roll the dice one more time and get another 20 d6. All right, so there's our 20. That make sense? But don't be confused about this. Don't think you can do something like this. A lot of beginning programmers think, oh, well, that's how I get access to quantity, so I can just set quantity that way. Why doesn't this make sense? Well, we just saw. What does that guy boil down to? What I have highlighted. The whole thing I have highlighted, what does it boil down to? In this example, it boils down to 20, right? So we're just redefining the literal, that is the number 20, to be the number 500. We're changing how counting works. So you go 18, 19, 500, 21, 22, 20.
Okay. That's a new man.
Not allowed to do that. Okay, we can't redefine literals. All right, so when you actually resolved it and you look at it that way, that does not make sense. That make sense?
I want to break math.
I want to break math. Okay. So this is how we would get direct read-only access to a private variable. So let's give some definition to that. Historically, these were called, accessor methods. More modernly, these are called getters. Okay? So an accessor method provides read-only access to a, we can call it a hidden value. In our case, hidden would mean private. Private variable, let's say, which boils down to a value. Okay? Now, understand that it's just a normal method. I mean, we see it defined right here. There's nothing special about this method versus the roll method that came right after it. I mean, they're both defined the same way. They both return an int, blah, blah, blah. So even though I'm telling you this guy is a getter, there's nothing special about making it a getter. It just happens to be what the method does. The method returns the value of a private variable. That makes it a getter. in description only. Java doesn't distinguish between getters and normal methods. It's just a method. That makes sense? Okay. What if I wanted to then write a method that allowed us to change the quantity? So now I want to write a method that gives us write access to a private variable. What would that method look like? So I want to write a method in here called setQuantity. And setQuantity should change the value of quantity to a value that was passed in. What would that guy look like? Public, private, or protected? Start off with that. Public, because we want to give access to the real world, so outside of this. What's it going to return? Somebody else other than Amish and Abe. Going to return an int? Tell me about that. What kind of int? Give me an example of the int it would return. If I'm setting the quantity to 500, so I'm going to pass 500 into this guy, what int would you expect to be returned? Or would you like to amend your answer? What's the answer? So here, let me come out here and show you if I was calling it. So let's say I'm going to call, here, we'll actually do it inside this print statement. dr is going to have a red line because we haven't finished writing it yet. Set quantity to 500. What would you expect this line to print out? You said it's going to, you're suggesting we might want this guy to return an int. What is your expectation? What would dr.setQuantity of 500 ultimately print out? That's what you think it should print out? Okay, why? Okay, so we're setting it to 500, but when you set something to 500, do you expect it to spit back the 500? It's not necessarily wrong. I'm just saying it doesn't make sense. Okay, so it's possible you might want to use the value, but chances are you already had the value since you passed it in a second ago, right? So realistically speaking, does it make tons of sense to pass something in and get it back out? It's like a freebie. So you go to one of the bubblegum machines, you put it in a quarter, what comes out? Piece of bubblegum. It will go to the ATM machine, and you know how you can deposit checks in there? You stick the check into the ATM machine, what do you expect to come out? Let's say nothing or a receipt, but let's just say in this example, nothing. Well, Tim wants the equivalent of our check to come back out. I mean, we still want the check to be deposited. Here's the $1,000 check, and then I hand you a $1,000 check back, but you still put $1,000 in your bank account. We wish it worked that way, right? Okay, so we probably don't want this guy to return anything. We want him to do something, but not actually spit anything back. You could make an argument that maybe he should return a Boolean, letting us know whether or not he successfully did something. You could make that argument. But let's make it void for right now. Name of the method is going to be called setQuantity. What about inputs? In order to set the quantity, what do I need? What do I need to work? What? Quantity. I need a new quantity. Okay. And internally, what am I going to do? How do I set the quantity to my new quantity? Don't all speak at once. No, somebody else. Everybody else isn't as idiotic as you come off. No, Abe, we've already determined you're not an idiot. We got some other people to pre-screen. What line of code would I write here to set the quantity equal to new quantity? We can make it a quiz. How do I set a variable equal to a value? What operator am I going to use? Am I going to use the assignment operator? This guy? Is this an example of me setting a variable to a value? What variable am I setting? How do I access my quantity field? Quantity field is up here. How do I access this guy? Go ahead. Well, that's what he's defined. He's defined as a private integer called quantity. But I need to access the variable called quantity. How do I get access to him? Go ahead. This. Okay. So I'm going to say this dot quantity. And I'm going to set that guy equal to something else. What am I going to set him equal to? New quantity. All right. So that gets us right access to a private variable. Why? Because set quantity does have access to this dot quantity. Why? Because even though quantity is a private private variables have access only within the class they were defined. So I'm in only when I'm inside the class called dice roll. And right down here, where I have set quantity, I am in fact inside that class. So I have access to it. Okay, notice it does not like this line anymore. Why? Because dr.setQuantity has no return value. So what I want to do instead is I just want to call dr.setQuantity to 500. So what am I going to do? I'm going to create a 20d6 roll it 3 times, then change my quantity to 500, then roll it again. So we're basically back to what we had earlier when we set the quantity directly. So now you might say, well, why didn't we just make it public? Right now, it's as if it's public, correct? I have 2 methods, one that lets me read the value, one that lets me write the value. So let's break this. Let's set the quantity to -5. What do you expect -5d6 to be? If I gave you a 6-sided die and I told you to roll this -5 times, you would be confused, correct? What's my output here going to be? It'll be something. Let's look at the roll method. Roll method starts off with the sum is equal to 0. We're going to start I off at 0. Keep going as long as I is less than quantity. Is 0 less than -5? Nope, not even the first time. Remember, for loops are pre-check loops. So we're just going to return 0. So -5 d6 is a 0.
That makes sense.
Does it? Or in real life, if somebody said roll -5 d6, would you just slap them in the face? 0 as the output doesn't really make sense. It's like sort of kind of acceptable-ish. It's like, okay, well, I can't do that, so I got nothing. So maybe 0 is like your way of slapping him in the face, is like, you know, being a nice guy. But the reality is wouldn't we want to ensure that when you set the quantity, you set it to at least a 1? That makes sense, right? If somebody's going to tell you to roll a d6, they need to tell you to roll it at least once. Otherwise, we're not going to let them destroy the current value of quantity. So we're going to come in here. How do I modify my set quantity to only allow them to change the quantity to something that's 1 or greater? Somebody else. I'm sure everybody's kind of recognized that we have a couple of people in class who are always answering the questions, and some other people have probably recognized that you suck at writing code. So at the end of the semester, when I have to give you your grade, I have to do it based on your mastery of the subject. So you got to show me some real-time crap as to that you actually understand this stuff when we're doing it in a classroom setting, because you can't do it when you're doing it in a quiz setting. So I'll help you along, and I'll probably make fun of you. I won't make too much fun of you. But I want other people to start trying to participate in this stuff, because it will make you better. If you just sit there and act stupid, then you're not helping anybody. So what I want to do is I want to only allow them to change the quantity here if I'm trying to change it to a value that's 1 or greater. How do I protect that? I only want to do something if the value I'm changing it to is 1 or greater. Go ahead.
You write an if statement in that set quantity method where it says if new quantity is greater than or equal to 1, and then put this type quantity, that line of code none braces.
Okay. So, ask this question. We're only going to do this crap if new quantity was something greater than or equal to 1. So we'll save that. So now, when I call set quantity with a -5, -5 is going to come in here. We're going to say, okay, is -5 greater than or equal to -1 or greater or equal to 1? It's not. So what are we going to do? We're going to do nothing. We're going to leave quantity intact. So we run this, and we see that our last roll is still a 20d6. We're guessing it's still a 20d6, but I promise you it's still a 20d6. Okay? So now we've differentiated a method like this from just making quantity public. Making quantity public doesn't give us an opportunity to pre-screen the value you're trying to set quantity to. We're creating a method like this, which is called a Mutator method, historically. Modernly, it's called a setter. Getters and setters is what they're referred to by programmers today. But historically, they were accessor methods and mutator methods. So a mutator, does it? It might sound more fun, but it's not as easy to say. Okay, so mutator methods allow, this is what here I want to use the same verbiage provides. Okay. Hello. Provides write access to a private variable with potential for pre-checking logic, something like that. So we can ask questions before we just randomly set a value. That's what setters are. Make sense? Again, that's just kind of vocabulary. Java doesn't have any sort of like special syntax for a setter. It just happens to be a method that sets a private variable we refer to as a setter. All right, so here's a reason to write getters and setters as opposed to just making a variable public. We have an opportunity to pre-screen our set variables before we just set something haphazardly. Make sense? Okay. So now we can potentially set our quantity, but we probably wouldn't. So we can leave that ability there, but we likely would not use that ability. When you want to roll a different number of dice or a different number of sides, you just create another dice roll, right? So I'm going to say dice roll dr2. Hello, dr2 is equal to a new dice roll 5d8, let's say. So now we can print out dr roll, dr2 roll, dr2 roll. Now, what if we wanted a dice roll to be able to identify itself? We wanted a dice roll to be able to say, if we asked dr to display itself, it should display 20d6, reminding us what that guy represents. If we asked dr2 to display itself, it should say 5d8, reminding us what it holds. So we want to write a display method. Did I already write one? No. So again, we'll make this public. We're just displaying something to the screen. So what's my return type going to be? Somebody else. If this method only displays something to the screen, what value would I return? Everybody take out a piece of paper. Put your name on it. You will only need one line. All right, put your name on it. You have 30 seconds. Tell me what the return type is. What should go in the question marks there? If display is meant to display 20d6, if the quantity was 20 and 6 was the number of sides, or 5d8 if the quantity was 5 and the number of sides was 8. What should this guy return? Huh? I just want the return type. I want you to fill in the blank for the question marks. 20 seconds left. All right, let's have them.
Instead of wasting paper, okay? Trying to be a better person.
Trying to be a better person.
Say your green initiative.
You laugh now, but this can be saved for a later quiz. Oh shit, is there notes on the back of that?
All right.
Yeah.
Oh well. Probably for another class. Hopefully that time is back.
You want Trista's answers?
What notes are on the back of that?
Said something about courses.
Oh, that's fine. It's just a list of it.
3 days later, oh, crap.
I did like that last answer I got. Last answer I got was, I don't know, I'm retarded. All right, only 6 of you got it wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
You're really gonna count the rest of them?
and 10 of you got it right. So this is a method that takes no parameters and only prints something to the screen. Therefore, it will return nothing. Void. How do I print to the screen something like 20D6 or 5D8? How do I create that? Now, I'll remind you from this quiz, on several occasions we've talked about the difference between returning a value and displaying a value, right? Right, remember that? We've harped on it. So in this case, we're just displaying a value, therefore we don't need to return a value. So how do I display to the screen something like 20D6, where 20 is the quantity, 6 is the number of sides, or like 5D8, where 5 is the quantity and 8 is the number of sides? How do I do that? Well, let's start off with this, baby steps. How do I display something to the screen? Go ahead. Well, come on, somebody else. We have to make this be another quiz. I know all of you have extra paper. Go ahead. System.out.println. That's how we display crap to the screen, right? Okay, so now the crap I want to display to the screen is something that looks kind of like that, or something that looks kind of like that. So I want to display the quantity followed by a D, quantity, followed by num sides. That's what I want to display to the screen. How do I do that? Somebody else? Oh, hell, I'll take it. Go ahead, tell me.
Quantity.
How about this dot quantity? This dot quantity?
And then plus, and then in parentheses, D.
Double inside double quotes?
Or, yeah,
D?
and then plus num sides.
This dot?
Yeah.
Num sides? That? So, what operator is this? In this context. That plus, go ahead. This is the concatenation operator. That allows us to build strings as opposed to the addition operator. So, if I say 5 plus 7, this is the addition operator. If I say 5 plus the string 7, this is the concatenation operator. This guy boils down to 12. This guy boils down to the string 57. So concatenation allows us to glue things together. All right, building strings. Does that make sense? So since a string is involved here, since we have a string right here and that's involved, this operator is considered to be concatenation. So this first part will take whatever the quantity is and concatenate it with D, giving us something that looks like the string 20D. And then we're concatenating onto that num sides. So if the num sides is 6, the result would be 20D6. Make sense? All right. So now we can go ahead and say ask dr to display themselves and ask dr2 to display itself. Now remember, the display method prints something to the screen. It does not return a value. So this ability, when we say dr.display, behind the scenes, this guy knows that I'm going to display something to the screen. I'm giving a directive. I'm giving an order to dr, which is an instance of dice roll. I'm giving the same order to dr2, which is an instance of dice roll. So it's kind of like if you're in the army and you ask two different guys to tell you their name and rank. Both guys are instance of army people. You tell one of them, give me your name and rank. Says it. Tell another one, give me your name and rank. He says probably a different name and different rank unless you're in a weird situation. Okay, so what should the output, let me get rid of all this crap up here. What should the output of this program be? You can do another quiz. Like every single class, I could just use a one-page quota. We have a one-page paper quota. You use your paper wisely. At some point, if you're not able to answer the quiz questions off the paper you have remaining, it's an auto zero. Go on, Evan. 20d6, 5d8 should be the output of this guy. 20d6, 5d8. We asked each of those objects to display themselves. Make sense? Now what will the output, here, let's keep it simple. I'm having enough trouble getting one answer out of people. Let's not push it with 4 lines. What would the output of this program be? Roughly. Hint, hint. At this point, I accept answers from anybody except Amish and Abe. Both of them have earned their quota of class participation, which I do appreciate, by the way. But I also know that you guys know the answer to this. Go ahead.
Memory addresses.
2 different memory addresses, right?
What it was before? No, never mind. Yeah, just the memory
Right.
addresses.
Yep. Two strange-looking memory addresses. Okay. Why? Why to get memory addresses? Well, what's DR? DR is a variable. DR is a variable, and variables hold values. What's the value of DR? A memory address. That memory address happens to point up to somewhere in memory where the actual instance of dice is, but the actual value of DR is a memory address. So, once again, we see the ugly lie that is pointers don't exist in Java. All right, but we also see the interestingness of the fact that Java is a virtual machine, so we're seeing that they've actually created a level of abstraction above real memory. So they've created their own version of memory where a memory address looks like the word that is the object this guy is at, and then the freaky deaky memory address. Okay, which is a hexadecimal number. And this is another hexadecimal number. Actually, it occurs to me that while these are hexadecimal numbers, it's probably more likely that those are just unique identifiers. Because this would be one huge number in decimal. And this would be another huge number in decimal. So, more than likely, this is just a randomly generated yet unique identifier for this particular object in memory. All right, so that's why we got memory addresses out of this. Now, wouldn't it be nice? Well, here, because we got memory addresses because these guys are objects, right? And objects hold memory addresses. So we'll say string s is equal to hello. Actually, here we'll new string hello. Could be another trick question. What does the new keyword do? Real estate agent gives us a memory address, right? Okay, so we use the real estate agent 3 times for building 2 dice rolls and building a string. So this is one of the constructors for the string class. The other thing is just syntactic sugar, making building strings a little bit easier because strings are so important to the language. So we saw that this guy prints out a memory address. We saw that this guy prints out a memory address. What's this guy going to print out? Remember, I used the new keyword. Now, I'll let Abe and Amish answer this one too. Go
Hello.
I think it's going to print out hello. Okay, I agree. Why? At this point, I'm asking you to speculate. So here, we'll show the evidence first. It does indeed print out hello. You have a speculation?
I remember that we discussed this, that even though that it has the memory address, like the system.out.println, that like function, if you will, is designed in a way that if you provide it a string like that, it won't just print the memory address, it'll go to it.
Okay, so there's something special about strings, seemingly, right? Okay. But what if I wanted dice roll to print out the same thing as what dr.display printed out or dr2.display printed out? What if I wanted it to work differently? Could you make that happen, knowing what we know right now?
Can't you just make them like separate variables and then put it into a string?
Well, okay, tell me how.
Make them into variables and write a string that has a variable in it.
Oh, I get it.
That's pretty straightforward.
No, I get it. You want to say string S2 is equal to 20d6 and string S3 is equal to 5d8. You want me to just hard code strings?
Kinda like that, yeah.
Okay, well, what I want to do is I want this line, as written, to display 20d6, where this line stays the same. So I still want to create a dice roll object, yet I want to be able to print out that dice roll object and have it show up as a nice value rather than a weird memory address. And the way to do that, I'm going to write a second method here. Public string toString. And I'm going to have toString return the quantity concatenated with the D, concatenated with the number of sides. That's what this guy's going to do. So I'm going to go back into driver now. Now remember, this was our previous output. I haven't changed anything in driver. So now driver prints out something much nicer. Why? Well, there must be something special about this toString thing. Must be something special about this method. And let me go to the Java documentation and show you this. So I'll go to java.lang. We will go to the string class first. And we see that string has one parent, and that parent is object. I'm going to click on object for right now. We're going to scroll down and we're going to look at the method summary of object. And we see that we have this method in here called toString. And what does toString do? It returns a string representation of a generic object. And I promise you that is that weird, funky memory address. That is the string representation it's returning. Now, we'll go back to string. And we see in here that string under the method summary has rewritten that method. That's called method overriding. They overrode the method so that there's a more local version of the method. Method resolution works very similar to variable resolution. When we call upon a method, we call upon the most local definition of that method. Remember, strings are in fact objects, which means they get all the crap that comes with an object, including the toString method. So when we just call the toString method normally, it's just like our dice roll. Dice roll is also an object. So it gets its own toString method, which does the exact same thing as object's toString method did. Funky memory address. Instead, we decided to overwrite that method, giving us a more local version of it that does this, rather than call upon the crazy memory address thing. And then the last punchline here would be this. Remember we talked about super is how we refer to our parent? So we'll call upon our parent's toString method first, then concatenate onto that our nice text. And we see we get funky memory address followed by 20d6. Funky memory address followed by 5d8. Does that make sense? So that's how toString works. All right, we will come back on Tuesday. Very likely you might have a quiz covering a lot of this stuff on Tuesday. So make sure you watch the video, study up. I'll see everybody then.